My wife secretly inherited $300K from her late uncle, convinced me to sign a prenuptial that left me with nothing. Then, just as I was about to challenge the will, she vanished with the money. And now her brother is threatening legal action over our house worth $850, $0, claiming I forged her signature. I never thought I'd be the guy writing about how I found out my wife was cheating on me, but here I am. The craziest part. It all started with a mountain of money I never knew she had a hand in. Honestly, I should have seen the signs earlier, but I was too caught up in trusting her, trusting that she was the woman I married, the woman I thought I knew. Her name was Lisa, and we'd been married for about 5 years. Up until the last few months, everything seemed normal. We had our ups and downs, sure, but I genuinely believed we were solid. Then suddenly, things started to feel off. She'd be secretive about her phone, deleting messages, avoiding eye contact when I'd ask about her day. Little things that I brushed off as stress or tiredness. But the real bombshell came when I stumbled across some documents on her laptop, things I never expected to see. It was late one night, and I was browsing through her email because she'd been acting more distant than usual. That's when I found the email from her uncle's lawyer. Turns out, Lisa had inherited a hefty $300, $0 from her late uncle, a fact I never knew. The money was supposed to be kept separate, but I noticed she'd been talking about a big plan to move it around, invest, and do something big. I started digging deeper, and that's when I found the real shocker. A signed prenuptial agreement drafted just a month before our wedding that explicitly left me with nothing, absolutely zero. It was like she'd planned to keep her inheritance completely separate, even from me. I confronted her about it the next day, and her reaction was classic Lisa. She rolled her eyes, said I was overreacting, and called me paranoid. She claimed the prenup was just standard, that it was nothing personal, and that I was making a big deal out of nothing. But I wasn't buying it. How could she do that? How could she marry me knowing she had this secret stash and a prenup that basically left me with nothing? I felt like I'd been played for a fool. Things got worse when I started to piece it all together. She'd been acting weird around the house, spending hours on her phone, sneaking out late at night, and always insisting she was working late or meeting friends. Then, I overheard her talking on the phone once when she thought I wasn't around. I caught a snippet of her saying, "Can't wait to see you tonight," and I recognized the voice immediately. It was a guy I'd never heard her mention before, but from the tone, I could tell they'd been seeing each other for a while. The betrayal hit me hard. Not just because she was cheating, but because she'd kept all this from me. Her inheritance, her secret affair, even the fact that she was planning a future with someone else. It was like I was living with a stranger. And to top it all off, she was acting like she was the victim when I confronted her. She said I was jealous, insecure, that I was imagining things, and that she loved me. But her actions told a different story. Her lies, her sneaking around, her secret boyfriend. I felt like I was losing my mind. I didn't know what to do at first. I was furious, hurt, and deeply betrayed. I'd always thought we'd grow old together, that we'd build something real. Instead, I found out she'd been planning her escape with her lover and her inheritance all along. The worst part, she convinced me to sign that prenuptial agreement which left me with nothing, right before we got married. I was so blinded by love, or maybe just naive, I didn't question it. Now I realized she'd been manipulating me from the start. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't focus at work, kept replaying everything in my mind. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut every time I thought about her with that other guy. I knew I had to do something, something to find out the truth, to get some clarity. I decided I'd dig deeper, find out exactly how long she'd been cheating, and what she was planning to do with her inheritance. I also knew I needed to gather evidence if I wanted to confront her publicly or take legal action. But the question was, how much more was I willing to tolerate? The betrayal cut deep, and I wasn't sure I could forgive her even if I wanted to. That's when I realized that everything I thought I knew about her, about us, was a lie. And I had to face the fact that my marriage, the woman I loved, might be over. Or at least that's what I kept telling myself. Deep down, I knew I had to be prepared for whatever was coming next. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became that Lisa had been planning her escape for a while. Her secret affair, the inheritance she hid, the prenuptial agreement, everything pointed to her not being the woman I married. I started to piece together the timeline in my head, trying to figure out when she started cheating, how long she'd been planning to run off with her lover and her money, and what her next move might be. I decided I needed proof. I couldn't just confront her based on suspicion alone. I set up a few discreet cameras around the house, especially in her usual hiding spots, her closet, the living room, even the garage. I also kept a close eye on her phone, which she always kept glued to her hand or hidden when I got close. I knew she was lying about everything, but I needed hard evidence to make my case. I felt like I was on a sinking ship, and I had to gather as much intel as possible before the inevitable explosion. One night, I followed her when she said she was meeting a friend for drinks. I knew she was lying. She was heading to a hotel downtown. I watched from a distance, heart pounding, as she went inside. I waited a few minutes, then slipped in after her, pretending to be just a concerned husband. I didn't expect to see what I saw through the window of her hotel room. There she was, in bed with some guy I'd never seen before. They were naked, or at least partially naked, and from the way they were touching each other, it was obvious they'd been at it for a while. I felt like I'd been punched again. My stomach twisted. All those nights I thought she was working late, she was really with him. That's when I knew for sure she'd been cheating on me for months, maybe longer. The worst part, she looked completely at ease, like this was just another day for her. I stayed hidden, took some photos, then quietly slipped out. I was shaking, furious, and heartbroken. How could she do this to me? I'd been nothing but good to her. I thought we had a future. And now I find out she's been lying, cheating, planning her escape with her lover and her inheritance behind my back. All the trust I ever had was a lie. The next day I confronted her. I told her I knew everything, the affair, the inheritance, the prenup, the hotel night. She tried to deny it at first, saying I was crazy, that I was reading too much into things. But I showed her the photos, the emails, the messages I'd saved. Her face turned white. She stammered, then started crying, trying to spin some story about how it was just sex, that she didn't mean anything, that she was stressed out and needed comfort. She begged me to forgive her, said it was a mistake, that she loved me and only me. But I wasn't buying it. How could I? She'd lied to me for months, maybe longer. She'd been sneaking around, lying about her whereabouts, and now she was trying to manipulate me into forgiving her. I felt a mixture of anger, disgust, and deep sadness. I'd trusted her. I'd given her my heart, and she threw it back in my face. I realized then that I couldn't just sweep this under the rug. I had to decide what I was going to do next. My mind was racing. Part of me wanted to just pack my bags and walk away. Part of me wanted to fight for what was rightfully mine, her inheritance, the house, everything. But I knew I couldn't trust her anymore. I also knew I had to protect myself legally. That's why I started to dig into the financial mess she'd left behind. Turns out, she'd already transferred a chunk of her inheritance into some secret accounts, probably planning to run off with it. She'd even hired a lawyer to draw up some documents that looked suspicious. I was furious, but at the same time, oddly relieved that I finally had proof. I called a lawyer the next day, and that's when I learned about the will she inherited from her uncle. It was a sizable estate, and she'd convinced me to sign a prenup that left me with nothing. The lawyer told me I might have grounds to contest the prenup, especially since she'd hidden assets and possibly forged my signature on some documents. This was a game changer. I was starting to see that I wasn't just dealing with a cheating wife. I was dealing with a con artist who'd been planning her escape for months. As I sat there staring at the evidence I'd gathered, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief because I finally knew the truth, and dread because I realized how deep her lies went. I was hurt, angry, betrayed, but I also knew I had to fight for what was mine, for my dignity, and for whatever shred of self-respect I had left. The road ahead was messy, but I was determined to see it through. And maybe, just maybe, I'd come out the other side stronger. After I gathered enough evidence, I knew I couldn't just sit back and let Lisa walk away with her money and her new lover without consequences. I felt like I'd been hit by a freight train, but I also realized I needed to act fast. The first thing I did was confront her again, but this time with all the proof in hand. I sat her down in the living room, my heart pounding, and laid out everything I knew: her affair, the inheritance she'd secretly inherited, her plans to disappear, and the forged signatures. Her reaction was classic Lisa. She looked stunned at first, then started to spin her usual bullshit. "You're overreacting," she said, brushing her hair back. "This is all just a misunderstanding. You're jealous, insecure, and you're trying to ruin me." She claimed her affair was just sex, nothing serious. She insisted, just a way to relieve stress. She said her inheritance was her business and I had no right to question her about it. Her voice was sharp, her eyes cold, and I could see she was trying to manipulate her way out of this mess. I didn't buy her lies anymore. I told her I had enough, that I was done being played for a fool. I told her I was going to see a lawyer and take legal action. That's when she started crying, real tears this time, claiming she loved me, that she'd made a mistake, and that she didn't want to lose everything. But her crying felt hollow. I could see right through it. She'd been lying for months, planning her escape, and now she was trying to make me feel guilty so I'd back off. I felt a complex mix of emotions: anger, heartbreak, and a deep sense of betrayal. I'd trusted her with my life, my future, and she'd been secretly cheating and planning her getaway all along. I realized that I had to protect myself legally, especially since she'd been transferring money into accounts I wasn't aware of, and I was pretty sure she'd forged my signature on some documents related to her inheritance and the house we owned. I decided to hire a lawyer specializing in family law and estate disputes. I handed him everything I had: the emails, the photos, the bank statements, the prenup, and the forged signatures. The lawyer explained that I might have grounds to challenge the prenup, especially if I could prove that Lisa had lied or manipulated me into signing it. He also warned me about the threat of her brother, Mark, who was threatening legal action over the house worth $850, $0, claiming I forged Lisa's signature on the deed. That was a real shocker. I thought I was just fighting to keep my marriage alive, but now I was tangled in a legal war over our house. Mark was furious, accusing me of fraud and threatening to sue me into oblivion if I didn't return what's rightfully theirs. I knew I had to prepare for a fight, both emotionally and legally. I started gathering every document, every email, every piece of proof I could find, just in case things escalated. The next few days were a whirlwind. I kept digging into her financial accounts, trying to find any trace of her plans to run off. I discovered she'd already transferred a good chunk of her inheritance into secret accounts, probably to hide her assets from me and her brother. I also found out she'd hired a lawyer to draft some documents that looked suspicious, possibly related to the house or her inheritance. I felt sick thinking about how much she'd lied, how much she'd betrayed me. Meanwhile, Lisa kept trying to manipulate me. She'd send me long texts, crying, pleading, saying she was sorry and confused, trying to make me feel guilty. She insisted she loved me, that she'd never cheat if I just forgave her, but I knew better. I saw her with that guy, I had proof of her lies, and I wasn't about to be played again. Every time she reached out, I'd just ignore her. My mind was made up. I needed to protect myself and figure out how to get her out of my life for good. I also reached out to Mark, her brother. I wanted to hear his side, see what he thought about all this. He was furious, accusing me of forging Lisa's signature on the house deed and threatening to take me to court. I told him I had proof: bank statements, emails, witness statements, that Lisa had been planning her escape and that I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Mark was furious, but he also seemed to be trying to play it cool, probably trying to figure out how to handle the situation himself. I knew this was about to turn into a full-blown legal battle. Looking back, I realized I was in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, she'd been hiding this whole other life from me. Her affairs, her inheritance, her lies about the house, all of it was a betrayal I never saw coming. And now I was left to pick up the pieces. I decided I'd fight for what was rightfully mine, even if it meant destroying the illusion of our marriage. I knew I couldn't trust her anymore, and deep down, I was starting to accept that this might be the end of everything I thought we had. But I wasn't giving up without a fight. Not yet. The legal storm was gathering faster than I expected. I spent sleepless nights poring over documents, trying to find any weakness in her story or evidence of her deception. I was desperate to prove that Lisa had forged my signature on the house deed, and that she'd been secretly transferring money out of her inheritance into accounts I didn't even know about. The more I dug, the more I realized how deep her lies went. I hired a private investigator to follow her, just to get a clearer picture of her movements. It was a gamble, but I needed to see if she was actually planning to disappear completely. Sure enough, he confirmed she'd been meeting with that guy, Mark, her brother told me his name, at various locations around town. They'd been meeting for months, sometimes in the early mornings, sometimes late at night. It was clear she was serious about starting a new life with him, and her inheritance was the ticket out. Meanwhile, Mark was getting more aggressive. He sent me a series of threatening emails, claiming I had forged Lisa's signature on the house deed and demanding I return the house immediately or face legal action. I knew I had to counter this with concrete proof. I gathered all the bank records, emails, texts, and witness statements I could find. I also got a handwriting expert to analyze the signatures on the documents she claimed were hers. The results were damning. The signatures didn't match, and it was clear they'd been forged. That's when I decided to confront Lisa again. I called her at work, told her I had enough evidence to prove she'd been lying to me from the start. I told her I was going to take this to court, that I'd fight her every step of the way. Her reaction was a mix of panic and anger. She insisted she was innocent, that I was just trying to ruin her, but I cut her off. I told her I knew about her affair, about the inheritance she'd kept hidden, and about the forged signatures. I warned her that this was only the beginning and that I'd make sure she paid for all her lies. She hung up on me furious. I could hear her crying, cursing, threatening to destroy me if I went through with this. But I didn't care anymore. I felt betrayed on every level, and I knew I had to protect myself legally. I filed a lawsuit to contest the house deed, claiming forgery and fraud, and I also filed to challenge the prenup, arguing that she'd manipulated me into signing it under false pretenses. I had a feeling this was going to get messy and expensive. In the meantime, her brother Mark was not backing down. He hired his own lawyer, and now we were headed toward a full-blown legal battle over the house, worth about $850, $0. Mark accused me of theft and fraud, claiming I'd forged Lisa's signature on the deed. I knew I had the evidence to prove otherwise, but I also knew that legal disputes like this could drag on for months, maybe years. It was a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Every day I felt more drained. I'd go to work, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept replaying everything: the lies, the cheating, the betrayal. I'd always believed in honesty and loyalty, and now those words seemed meaningless. I was furious that Lisa had manipulated me so completely, that she'd convinced me to sign that prenup, and that she'd been planning her escape for so long. The money she inherited was supposed to be for her future, but she'd used it to fund her affair, her lies, and her betrayal. One night, I caught myself sitting alone in the dark, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I'd let things get so out of control. I was angry at her, yes, but also at myself for not seeing the signs earlier. I trusted her blindly, and now I was paying the price. I realized I needed to get out of this mess, to protect what was mine, and to start rebuilding my life. But first, I had to win the legal battle. I had to prove she'd been lying from the start, that she'd manipulated me into signing the prenup, and that she'd forged my signature on the house deed. I was prepared for a long fight. I knew that Lisa had some tricks up her sleeve. She was a master at lies and manipulation. But I also knew I had the truth on my side. Every piece of evidence I collected was a step closer to justice. I'd be damned if she got away with stealing my house, my money, and destroying what little trust I had left in her. This was war, and I was ready to fight to the bitter end. The legal battle was now in full swing, and I knew I had to stay one step ahead. Every day felt like a new threat, a new lie uncovered, or a new piece of evidence that could turn the tide. I had hired a top-notch lawyer who specialized in estate disputes and forgery cases. We worked tirelessly, reviewing every document, every email, every text message Lisa had sent or received. I wanted to ensure there was nothing she could use against me, nothing to suggest I was the villain in all this. One of the most critical pieces of evidence we uncovered was a series of emails Lisa had sent to her lawyer, discussing her plans to disappear with her inheritance and her lover. She'd even asked about ways to forge signatures or hide assets. It was clear she was actively planning her escape, and her lawyer had advised her on how to manipulate the legal system to her advantage. That was the smoking gun I needed, that she'd been actively lying and scheming from the start. Meanwhile, her brother Mark was relentless. He filed a formal lawsuit claiming I forged Lisa's signature on the house deed, demanding that I surrender the property immediately. My lawyer pushed back, presenting the handwriting analysis and bank records that proved her signatures were fake. The judge ordered a forensic examination of the deed, which confirmed the signatures didn't match Lisa's handwriting. That was a huge win, but I knew this was just the beginning. Mark was furious and threatening to bring in more witnesses, more evidence, and to drag this through the courts for as long as it took. Throughout all this, Lisa kept trying to contact me, pleading, crying, begging for forgiveness. She insisted it was all a misunderstanding, that she loved me, and that I was overreacting. She claimed that her affair was just sex, nothing serious, and that the inheritance was hers to do with as she pleased. She even tried to manipulate me by saying she'd give me some of the money if I just forgave her and moved on. But I saw through her lies. I knew she was just trying to buy time, to manipulate her way out of the mess she created. One night, I decided to confront her face to face. I wanted her to see that I wasn't backing down anymore. I told her I had all the evidence, her emails, the forged signatures, the bank transfers, and that I was prepared to take this all the way to court. I told her that her lies had destroyed whatever trust we had, and that I was done being her pawn. She broke down crying, saying she was sorry, that she'd made a mistake, that she loved me. But I wasn't buying it anymore. Her apologies felt hollow, empty. I also reached out to her friends and family to see what they knew. Some had suspected she was hiding something, but no one was really aware of the extent. Her closest friends told me she'd been acting strange for months, secretive, distant, always on her phone. Her brother Mark knew about her affair, but he didn't realize how deep her lies went until I showed him the evidence. It was a shocking revelation for everyone involved. As the weeks went by, I started to realize the magnitude of her betrayal. She'd not only cheated on me with that guy, but she'd also manipulated her inheritance, forged signatures, and lied about everything to her family and me. I felt betrayed on every level, and I knew I couldn't trust her anymore. I was determined to fight for my rights and to make her pay for the damage she'd caused. The most difficult part was coming to terms with the fact that my marriage might be over. I loved Lisa once, but her actions proved she was no longer the woman I thought I married. I was angry at her, yes, but also hurt beyond words. I felt like I'd been duped, used, and discarded. But I also knew I had to move forward, clean up this mess, and rebuild my life from the ground up. In the end, I realized that the truth always comes out, no matter how much someone tries to hide it. Lisa's lies, her affair, her schemes, everything was catching up to her. And while this process has been painful, I'm starting to see a way out. I just hope that someday I can look back and know I fought for what was rightfully mine, and that I didn't let her steal the last piece of my peace. The court hearings dragged on longer than I expected, but in the end, the truth couldn't be denied. The forensic analysis on the house deed proved beyond any doubt that Lisa's signatures had been forged. The judge dismissed her claims outright and ordered her to surrender the house back to me, along with any assets she'd transferred into her secret accounts. Mark's lawsuit fell apart as well, since the evidence clearly showed she'd been manipulating the entire situation from the start. Getting the house back was a relief, but it didn't erase the months of pain and betrayal I'd endured. I felt exhausted, emotionally drained, but also strangely vindicated. I'd fought tooth and nail to protect what was mine, and I'd won. Still, I knew I had a long road ahead, Trust was shattered, and rebuilding myself after this kind of betrayal wasn't going to happen overnight. Lisa disappeared shortly after the court ruling. She left her phone behind, and I found out she'd gone to stay with her parents out of town. I didn't bother chasing her down. I had no desire to see her or hear her excuses anymore. I knew she'd be trying to start fresh somewhere else, perhaps with her lover or some new scheme. Honestly, I didn't care. I was done with her lies. Looking back, I realize how much I learned from all this. Trust is fragile, and sometimes people hide their true selves behind a facade of love and loyalty. Lisa was a master manipulator, and she used her inheritance to fuel her lies. I was naive to think she was everything I ever wanted. But I also learned that the truth has a way of coming out, no matter how deep someone tries to bury it. I've started to rebuild my life slowly. I've moved out of our old house, found a new place where I can breathe again. I've also become more cautious, more aware of the red flags I ignored before. I'm focusing on my career, my friends, and my own healing. It's not easy, but I know I'll come out of this stronger. To anyone reading this who might be going through something similar, here's what I'd say. Trust is earned, not given blindly. Keep your eyes open, pay attention to the signs, and don't ignore your gut feelings. If you suspect deception or betrayal, investigate. Don't just brush it off. And most importantly, don't be afraid to fight for what's rightfully yours. No amount of betrayal is worth losing yourself over. This experience has been one of the hardest in my life, but I refuse to let it define me. I'll move forward wiser and more cautious, knowing that sometimes the greatest victories come after the darkest storms. And for everyone out there who's dealing with betrayal, stay strong, stay vigilant, and remember that the truth always finds a way to surface.